One of the last videos that I did covered some of the unique commanders that you could use to make a Superfriends deck, and after a poll, a majority of you voted for Xavier to get his own breakdown video. So how should we go about making a Xavier deck? First, let's go over Xavier's abilities. We can tap him at sorcery speed and choose one of two different options. First, we can remove a counter from a permanent that we control and populate, which is just creating another copy of a token we control. Or two, we can sacrifice a creature and proliferate, which just means that we can put a counter on any number of permanents that already have counters on them. And now for a Superfriends deck, that last ability is super valuable, since loyalty counters can be increased by proliferating. And now this gets into the deck's main game plan, which is making our Planeswalkers ultimate as fast as possible. Xavier's first ability can be useful for us, but we'll get into that later. To go back to our game plan, let's go over the WinCons of our Xavier deck. A decent amount of our Planeswalkers are going to have ultimates that in a sense win us the game. Now some Planeswalkers ultimates can win us the game instantly, like Liliana Dreadhorde General, which forces our opponents to choose a permanent of each permanent type and sacrifice the rest, which does include lands. This makes it to where there's a board state where pretty much we only have access to resources. Another good instant win Planeswalker is Teferi, Master of Time, which on ultimate lets us take 2 turns. And now to go into the other type of Planeswalker ultimate is the one that wins us the game over time. Taking a look at Vraska Golgari Queen, which states that whenever one of our creatures deals combat damage to a player, they lose the game. Now while in an ideal board state, this could win us the game on the turn that we ultimate, but in most games we're probably going to need 1 to 2 turns to set up enough creatures to get through to our opponents. And then there's Tezzeret Artifice Master, which gives us an emblem that allows us to search our library for any permanent and put it directly onto the battlefield at the beginning of our end step. And now while this is a super powerful ability, it's probably going to take us 1 to 2 turns again to get the right permanents out for us to win the game, unless we are in an ideal board state. And now there are plenty of other Planeswalkers that have strong ultimates that you can use, so whenever you're building your Xavier deck, you can really pick and choose which Planeswalkers you want to play the most as your WinCons. And now another piece that helps us get to our WinCon is Igarmoon Gauntlet, which gives all of our Planeswalkers another way to proliferate for 0, or even take an extra turn for -12. Another great ability on it is that whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we get to choose a permanent that we control with a counter on it and proliferate. And now another Superfriends staple card is the Chain Veil, and it works great in a Xavier deck, letting us activate all of our Planeswalkers abilities twice each turn, and we never really have to worry about the losing life clause just to the high number of Planeswalkers that we'll have in the deck. And now the next part of a Xavier deck I want to go over might be even more important than the Planeswalkers, and that's creature creation. As I stated before, for us to proliferate with Xavier, we have to sacrifice a creature, and if we're spending mana to cast a creature each turn just to sacrifice, we're not going to be playing the deck as optimally as possible. Key cards that we want in a Xavier deck are cards that can make tokens turn in and turn out without needing to spend any mana at all. I would recommend to add in a lot of Planeswalkers that have abilities that make creature tokens. This not only helps us with our game plan of getting to sacrifice them for Xavier's ability, but also they give us blockers early to help protect them. And now some of the Thallid cards can be really useful in a Xavier Superfriends deck. Every upkeep they're going to get a Spore counter, and you can remove 3 Spore counters to make a Saproling token with some of them. Now getting these out early is a great way to build up their Spore counters and make tokens, but most importantly, Spore counters can be also proliferated off of Xavier's ability for maximum value. And I would also recommend a lot of the staple landfall cards, such as Scoot Swarm and Springheart Nantuko, which in a Xavier deck shine, making sure that we have tokens to sacrifice every land drop. There are also other cards that aren't landfall centered, such as Compu Swarm, which can really get out of hand quickly after just a few turns. And this is also where Xavier's first ability really comes in handy, where we can remove a counter from one of our Planeswalkers or Thallids and use the first ability, making a copy of one of our Compu Swarms, or if we have 6 lands or more, one of our Scoot Swarm tokens. Making an extra copy of these cards can really make them get out of hand quickly and give us a massive army of tokens that we can either swing in or use as blockers to help protect our Planeswalkers. And now for the most important token makers that you can have in a Xavier deck, Scurry Oak and Basking Broodscale. Both of these creatures have the ability of once we put a +1/+1 counter onto them, we get to make a token. For Scurry Oak, we get to make a Scroll token, and for Basking Broodscale, we get to make an Eldrazi Spawn token. For Scurry Oak to get the first +1/+1 counter, we need a creature to enter with a higher power or toughness than it, and for Basking Broodscale, we need to pay 1 and a green to just put a +1/+1 counter onto it directly. Once we put that first +1/+1 counter onto these cards, we pretty much make sure we always have a creature token to sacrifice every single turn. And now after we have Scurry Oak and Basking Broodscale, we're only 1 card away from our main combo in our deck. Intruder Alarm is an enchantment that states that creatures do not untap during their untap step, but all creatures untap whenever another creature enters the battlefield. Now, for our main combo, we're going to need either Scurry Oak or Basking Broodscale on the field, plus Xavier and Intruder Alarm. For this combo, first we would sacrifice a creature, let's say a Squirrel token, and then we proliferate. We would put an extra counter on all of our Planeswalkers, and most importantly, on Scurry Oak. Now, whenever we put that extra counter on, we will make another Squirrel token, and once that Squirrel token enters, we then trigger Intruder Alarm, letting us untap all creatures, most importantly including Xavier. Then we can start the whole cycle over again. And now what this combo gives us is infinite proliferations, letting us ultimate with any of our Planeswalkers that we have on the field. But there's also another way that we can win from here. Let's say that we did this combo until we had over 100 +1/+1 counters on Scurry Oak in all of our Planeswalkers. Now we can use Xavier's first ability to remove a counter from one of those and make a copy of a creature token we control, being the Squirrel token. And now once this copy enters, it'll still trigger Intruder Alarm, letting us untap Xavier. Just now, instead of proliferating, we are getting extra tokens. And now this move means that even if we don't have one of our Planeswalkers that has an ultimate that can win us the game, we can still get a massive army of tokens that we can swing in on our opponents. Unfortunately, we do have to wait a turn cycle to attack with our infinite squirrels since we don't have a way to give them haste. But if our opponents don't have a board wipe ready, this can really be a game ender. Now that we've gone over the two key pieces to a Xavier deck, being Planeswalkers and our token creators, let's go over some other ways that we can really smooth out the experience of our deck. And now the first main way that we could do this is giving us cards that can untap Xavier besides Intruder Alarm. Kelpie Guide and Kiora's Follower are great ways to get an extra time of using Xavier's abilities each turn, and even some good Planeswalkers have ways to untap Xavier. These cards really help us get ahead, letting us use Xavier's abilities twice, and letting us get our Planeswalkers' loyalty counters up even faster. Another way that we can smooth out the deck is trying to address the main weakness of it, and that is that our Planeswalkers are expensive to cast. Most good Planeswalkers are going to have a mana cost of 5 or above, so making sure that we can get as much mana as possible is key to making this deck work. And now obviously green ramp staples are almost an auto include in a Xavier deck, but let's go over a lot of the other ramp pieces that actually work with Xavier's ability. Astral Cornucopia and Everflowing Chalice are ramp artifacts that we have to pay into to get charge counters on, and whenever we tap them, we get X amount of mana where X is equal to the charge counters on them. This means that if we pay 2 for X, we would be able to tap them for 2 mana. And now the main reason that we want these in our deck is that whenever we proliferate with Xavier, we can actually increase the amount of charge counters on both of them. This means that each turn whenever we are tapping Xavier to proliferate, we can actually get more and more mana as the game goes on from both of these ramp pieces. And now the last main thing I want to cover about a Xavier deck is understanding what your Planeswalkers synergize with. And there's a lot of options that you have with choosing Planeswalkers that synergize together. Let's take Vraska Golgari Queen from before and pair her with some good Garrett cards. Let's take Garrett Cursed Huntsman for example. His ultimate is usually pretty easy to hit, we just have to proliferate once or one of his wolves die off of his first ability, and whenever we ult with him, we get an emblem that states the creatures we control get +3/+3 and trample. So if we're able to get both of these ultimates, that means that whenever one of our creatures hits one of our opponents, they lose the game, and we have a way of buffing them up and giving them trample, making these two cards work perfectly together. And now I do want to hit a lot of expensive cards that I see people putting into their Xavier deck. Doubling Season and Vorinclex Monstrous Raider are pretty much auto includes in Superfriends deck, especially Xavier's. The only problem is that both of these cards run you around 50 to 60 bucks. What these cards do is really help smooth out our deck whenever it comes to proliferating. Both of them double the amount of counters that our Planeswalkers get whenever they enter the battlefield and that they get whenever we proliferate. This means that a super powerful card like Vraska Betrayal Sting will enter with 12 instead of 6 loyalty counters, making it able to ultimate on the first turn it enters. Both of these cards are great additions to a Xavier deck, but if you can't afford them, I don't really think your deck will suffer too much from not having them. And now another expensive card that you could add to a Xavier deck is Thornbite Staff. And now the main ability that we care about Thornbite Staff giving is that it gives the equipped creature that whenever another creature enters the graveyard, it untaps. So if we put it on Xavier, it stands in as another version of Intruder Alarm for our combo, letting us go infinite with Scurry Oak or Basking Broodscale whenever we sacrifice one of their tokens. Now Thornbite Staff runs around $25, but it's a nice inclusion if you can afford it. And now while Xavier does really work with a lot of expensive cards, I think that it's also a really good deck budget-wise. In the description below, I have 2 deck lists, one for a budget deck just under $100 and another one with a more expensive list, having more blinked out pieces. And now let me know in the comments below if you prefer this video format whenever I talk about commanders, where I kind of just go around the main themes of the deck, over what I did with the Alania video, where I built one deck and went over every card that I included in it. Personally, I like this format a bit better, just as I get to go over more cards that fit into more budget and some more expensive decks, but I'd like to hear some feedback as to what you guys prefer more. Xavier really is a commander that leads to some fun and unique games, so I hope that you guys enjoy building him as much as I did.